Hey, I just want to start this video out by shouting out Jimbo. This is where the original idea for this video came from. His video is the most painful thing about every brawler. My video is going to be the worst part about every brawler. This is more interaction based. Mine is more nitpicking the one flaw that each brawler has and choosing the worst one of them. A lot has changed over the last year. That's why I want to do this video. But once you're done with this video, go check that one out. It's really good. And yeah, shout out Jimbo. And guys, this video will be very subjective. So if you disagree with me, then just leave a comment. Oh, also, most of you don't even know that you're not subscribed. So just check. And if you're not subscribed, then do it. We're about to hit 1 million. The worst thing about Shelly is easily still her dash gadget. It's only 3 seconds shorter than Clay Pigeon's. I thought this update would fix it, but it did not. The worst part is that gadget by far. This one was kind of hard, but I think the worst part about Nita is her range. It's the one thing that really holds her back, especially in longer range maps. You never see her. If she had more range, she would be broken. The worst thing about Colt is easily the width of his attack. It is really hard to hit all 6 bullets. If you ever manage to do that, it's because you either predict perfectly or the enemy sucks at the game. It's the reason he's a difficult brawler. The width of his shots 100% are the worst part. The worst part about Bull to this day is still the fact that he cannot have Stomper all the time in his base kit. If he could, then he'd have a brand new gadget and life would be good, but still he suffers. There are 2 options for Brock. One is the projectile speed. It's really easy to dodge, but then the other one is his hypercharge super, because most of the time it still reduces his damage for no reason. Come on, Brock. Come on. The worst part about El Primo is the reticle of his attack. If this was a cone, it would fix all of his problems with his main attack. As it stands, most of the time it's really easy to weave around it, and sometimes it feels a little flimsy. So the worst part is literally the shape of his attack. The worst part about Barley is his lack of burst damage. If anybody jumps in on you, you're probably dead, because doing this really doesn't do that much damage, and yeah, it's over for you. The worst part about Poco is also his damage. He is such an easy target for anybody who can jump in on him. Like, 3 of his attacks don't take out most of the brawlers in this game, but anytime he does get a damage buff, he becomes broken. That's why they keep it as his worst thing. The worst part about Rosa is easily her range. If they made this any longer, she would be so broken. I feel like she's good in every other way. I couldn't think of anything else to say besides her range. If you know anything else, then let me know. The worst thing about Jessie is her health. Now, hear me out. I know it's kind of a cop-out, but she has no way to shield herself, heal herself, or anything like that. It all comes in with Scrappy, but Jessie herself is really vulnerable to people jumping in, to getting 2-shotted, because her health is so low. The worst part about Dynamite, in a weird way, is his main attack, because of the delay it has. It's unlike most other characters in this game, where if you're really trying, you can dodge every single attack just by reacting to it like this. It also makes it like almost impossible to fight back when somebody jumps in on you. The worst thing about Tick easily is his health. They do this on purpose. If he had more health, he would be so broken. You could say like his burst damage, but he has this. He has all of this. I don't see anything else that could be like the worst thing about him. The worst thing about 8-Bit, you can already see it. It's his movement speed. It is very slow. He's one of 2 brawlers in this game, I believe, who have it. This is miserable. I think the worst thing about Rico has to be his health. You could say like his burst damage, but you know, funny green button. You could say his range or anything like that, but no. Look at this. He's insane. Maybe it's a similar situation to Colt, and it's like the width of his attack, or just the attack in general. The brain power behind it is the worst thing about it. The worst thing about Daryl is his range. Open maps are his nemesis, but even then, with the double super, it's not as bad as it used to be, because you can get around pretty quick. Other than his range, though, he's a really well-rounded brawler, and his range isn't even that bad. Imagine if he had more. He would be so broken. I think the worst thing about Penny is her star power that makes her cannon go boom when you place it down, because it incentivizes you placing it in bad locations, and that makes it a bad ability. The worst thing about Carl is getting your super canceled. That is by far one of the most annoying things in the entire game, and his hypercharge did not fix that problem. This one's a little different because she doesn't have any exact flaws, but in wide open maps, she also doesn't really have a way to get up to people. She does have the gadget, but most of the time that's still not enough, so you could just say her range. The worst thing about Gus is randoms. When they try to dodge your super and they succeed. It happens more often than you would like it to. The worst thing about Bo, since he's such a well-rounded brawler, is probably his tripwire gadget. It can be good, but it's really specific with how you have to time it. The worst part about Ems is her close range damage, especially if you choose to not use the push gadget, because then you're just asking to lose in those kind of situations. Her close range damage is actually terrible. Literally 1,000 per shot. That is awful. The worst part about Stu is having high ping, because if you can't dash twice, then he goes from like a S tier brawler to like B tier. I think the worst thing about Piper is how slow slowly she lands with her super normally, because there are lots of situations where you could use that being faster. Like if you're chasing somebody, you want it to be faster. If you're running away, people could follow it. And that's why with the hypercharge, it goes so much faster. That makes it a lot better. I think the worst thing about Pam is her inconsistent damage. People don't play her for a reason, and I think it's just because her attacks don't really hurt that much. You can ignore them most of the time. If they were more consistent or the projectiles were larger, I think a lot more people would play her. The worst thing about Frank is using your super when you don't have the anti-stun gadget and then having your super get canceled. Just like Carl, it's one of the worst feelings ever. The worst thing about BB is the delay with her attack, because imagine if she did not have this delay. So many brawlers can bully her with the timings of her attack because they can just like slip behind you, slip in front of you, and they can avoid it pretty easily. But if it was instant, imagine Kenji with his slash constantly. That would be so broke. The worst thing about B is her uncharged shot, because if you do not have charge shot up and then somebody jumps on you, you're pretty much dead. But if you have charge shot up when somebody jumps on you, they immediately die. I think they made this her worst aspect on purpose, but still, that is what it is. The worst part about Nani is being unaware when you use your super. Now, you do have a shield to help protect you, but if somebody gets up to you while you're using your super, you might not even know, or by the time you do know, you might just be dead even if you have the shield because they're too close to you. The worst part about Edgar is getting countered. There are so many abilities in this game that can just cheese him once he jumps in, and it is the most difficult thing about this brawler. If most other brawlers didn't have some kind of way to push him around or one-shot him, he would be so broken. The worst thing about Griff, I think, still is Coin Shower, but the next worst thing about him is the fact that he hasn't gotten a skin in like 2 years. Grom has two contenders. One of them is the predictability of his attack. It makes him pretty easy to dodge, but the other worst thing about Grom is the fact that you have really no way to defend yourself when somebody jumps on you. You have no way to push them back. You have no way to shield yourself. You have no way to run away. So if somebody jumps on you, the best you can do is use this super and hope that they do not kill you by the time it lands on the ground. The worst thing about Bonnie is being stuck in Bonnie form after you jump out and having no way to really get it back, because even if you get a kill, it doesn't matter because it still takes just as long to get back into Bonnie form or Clyde form. I think the worst thing about Gale is his burst damage. This is a really difficult brawler to pick from because almost all of his stuff is pretty good and there's nothing about him that's exactly terrible. Even his health is good. Like his super is good. It does good damage. His hypercharge is good. His gadgets are good. His star powers are both good. There's barely any bad about Gale besides situations where you're getting outranged and outburst damage. The worst thing about Colette is her nuh-uh gadget, because like it is a good kill confirm, but that's also what her super is for, and you get her super really quickly anyways. So I don't really see any situation where anybody would use this gadget either way. Like it would work, but her other one is so much better. So good, in fact, that it makes this one terrible. The worst thing about Belle is her movement. She has no way to run away when people jump on her. She has no way to go in. She has a normal movement speed and no options. That is the worst thing about her, because otherwise she would be insane. She's already got a really good kit. The worst thing about Ash now, I think, is the delay with his attack. Maybe even the range, but that could be a stretch. Just like BB, if he did not have this delay, he would be so broken. There's a reason why they added it. The worst thing about Lola is the fact that you're supposed to throw your clone far away, but that is the incorrect way to use it. The better way to use it is just to do this, even after they nerfed it. What do you guys think they should do about this? The worst part about Sam is not having walls for your super, but even worse than that is putting your super in a location where you cannot retrieve it. Do you guys think they should just make it slowly go off water so then you can pick it up? Because I think that would be a pretty good idea for when this happens. Even after the buff, I still think the worst thing about Mandy is her projectile speed. Something about this brawler feels so clunky to me, and I think that's the reason. Other than that, she also doesn't have very good burst options for when somebody jumps on you. She has no way to escape, so you could say her movement as well, but I think the projectile speed kind of stands out. Guys, imagine Maisie without this little delay at the start of her attack. That makes her really weird to play, but it also makes her a very skilled brawler, because her super is kind of no skill. I mean, you just press funny button and boom, like that. But bro, without this delay on her attack, which is definitely the worst thing about her, she would be so broken. The absolute worst thing about Hank is not having your super and having somebody jump on you, because the best you can do is this. Unless charging the bubble for 10 seconds helps you, but you're probably dead by the time this happens. I think the worst part about Pearl is how slow the heat bar goes up. There's really no way to make it go up faster, and with how slow it does go up, it really makes her bad in aggressive game modes or aggressive situations, and only makes her great in passive modes like knockout or showdown, even though she's not good in showdown. Guys, I'm gonna be honest, Larry Laurie almost has everything. He's one of those brawlers that has so many options, but I do think the worst part about him is the order swap top gadget just because nobody ever uses it and nobody will. The worst part about Angelo is having to charge your shots like this. If he was a normal sniper like every other brawler, way more people would play him. I think that this downside is the one thing that keeps him from being like one of the most played brawlers in the game, because otherwise his mechanics are actually crazy, but the charge definitely does nerf him a lot. Barry is a really difficult one because he's kind of like Larry Lurry. He can almost do everything, but I do think the worst thing about him is his reload speed. If his reload speed was faster, even with the star power, it's a little bit too slow. If it was faster, he would be somehow even more broken than he already is right now. Shade is a weird one because I thought he was going to be really good, but he's not played nearly as much, and I think it's because of his range. Possibly the delay on his attack, but more than anything, I think it might be his range that holds him back the most. The worst thing about Meeple is easily his reload speed. This is the slowest in the game, I believe. Just look at how terrible that is. They even buffed it, but it's still awful. Like, that is really slow. The worst thing about Mortis is either walls, because you can easily waste all of your ammo on them, but if you don't count that, then I think the worst thing about him is his damage over time, or his reload speed, or both combined. Because once you run out of ammo and you're against somebody who has more damage over time than you, you are going to lose. There's really nothing you can do about it. I think the worst thing about Tara is her super charge rate. Obviously, they make it really low for a reason, but full clipping people this much and still not getting a super is kind of rough. The worst part about Jean easily is his hypercharge. Not only does it most of the time do absolutely nothing to help you with the 3 hands, but if you do end up pulling 2 people, you're probably gonna die. Also, it nerfs your super because it pulls them in faster and gives you less time to burst out damage before they even reach you, meaning you stun them for less time. It is a nerf. The worst thing about Max, unfortunately, is her Sneaky Sneakers gadget. For some reason, this is the same timer as one of the best gadgets in the game, which is her other gadget. Really weird. I think this needs to get reworked. The worst thing about Mr. P is his damage output, specifically when somebody is coming your direction. You're gonna do just about no damage because you're only going to hit the first briefcase, and that is some of the lowest damage in the entire game. So whether you're getting jumped on or somebody is literally walking your direction, that is definitely the worst part about Mr. P. I think the worst thing about Sprout has to be his movement. Either that or his lack of auto aim ability. Either of those things being fixed would make him a way better brawler, but both of these are factors as to why, like, if somebody jumps on you, you're pretty much dead. You could do some weird super shenanigans, but most of the time that's kind of difficult and might not even work in the first place. But he has no movement options, and he has no way to really auto aim on people ever in close range. And I think the worst thing about Byron has to be his health. It's low for a reason, I'll say that. Like, it is lower than most brawlers in this game. Surprisingly low, actually. I thought it was higher than this. 4,800, really? Man, I think the worst thing about Squeak has to be his reload speed. It's not the slowest in the game, but it is slow enough to really hold him back. Like, you can't really burst shots out that often. Alternatively, you could say it's his burst damage, but I think the reload speed goes in with that, because if you have more than one shot on somebody, it does do burst damage, but without the reload speed, you don't get enough burst damage. Lou is similar to Colt, and I think the worst thing about him is just the fact that his main attack is this narrow. It makes it very hard to hit all 3, and it makes it very easy to dodge. Unfortunately, I think the worst part about Ruffs is his field promotion star power. It is really fun to mess around with, but since it's only 30 health per second, and if they ever die, it gets reset, it just isn't really worth using, which sucks. I love this star power. The worst thing about Buzz has to be these close range brawlers that can stun him. So either burst damage against him or being knocked back, because his attack is one of those that you can cancel, and some brawlers can really abuse that. It's kind of a wombo combo. Like Shelly super, even Bull is really good against him. Anybody who can toss him around is really good. This one's gonna be a little different, but I think the worst thing about Fang is using your super to try and get fresh kicks, but they barely survive with enough health, and then you don't get your super back, and then you cry. I think the worst thing about Eve is her motherly love gadget. Even now, I just don't see situations where people would want to use it, because the good thing about Eve is the fact that your babies will go in and swarm the enemies. Not only do you take that away when you use this gadget, but you also remove the fact that you can jump with the other gadget. Janet is one or two things. Leave a comment what you think it is, but it's either stage view star power, because like the other one's just way better and you rarely needed this much vision, especially during a Janet super. But the other worst thing about her is accidentally auto aiming with her attack, because this is miserable. I don't know, it just feels really weird doing this. It doesn't have that much range at all. I think the worst thing about Otis is his dormant star gadget, and I know that it can be used. I know that some people do use it, but he's a really well-rounded brawler. But I can see a world where it is pretty good if you do miss it, but I don't see anything that's worse about Otis than this gadget. I think the worst thing about Buster has to be his super when you're fighting enemies that don't really affect it, because then at that point it's completely useless. There's no point of even using it. He doesn't have a super. The worst thing about Gray is how thin and slow his projectiles are. I know this used to be a little worse, but it is the most difficult thing about him, and it is the one thing that holds him back. Pros work around this, but like the most casual players in the game really struggle with this. RT might have the thinnest attack in the game. If his attack was wider, he would be such a broken brawler. So this is obviously on purpose why they did this, but it is the worst thing about him. The worst part about Willow has to be wasting your super on a spawnable. That is painful. I would say the worst thing about Doug is his attack, but if he had more movement speed or any movement options, that wouldn't be a problem. So I think the worst thing about Doug is his movement. Even though he has fast movement speed, sometimes it's just not really enough. Chuck has a lot of weird problems, I guess, in quotation marks, but I think the worst part about him is his main attack. It just feels really clunky to me. I don't know if anybody agrees with this. Maybe I'm alone, but his attack does not feel that easy to use. It's kind of thin, even though it doesn't look thin. It just feels thin. It's slow. It's easy to dodge. It's just not the best basic attack in the world. I don't know what the worst part about Charlie is. Like, it must have to be her super charge rate, because you do have to hit a lot of shots to get her super. Besides that, though, she doesn't have any glaring problems. Worst part about Miko, for a good reason, is his reload speed. It is terrible. This might actually be the slowest in the game now that I think about it. Maybe even slower than Meeple. I think the worst thing about Melody, and this is really weird, but situations where you have to walk in the direction of your notes, because if you do, you essentially make them move slower because you're kind of like going with them. It's kind of weird because if you move the other way, then they technically go faster. The worst part about Lily is easily her main attack, just the range of it, because there's really no situation where you're ever gonna walk up to somebody and do this. When have you ever done that? Let me know. When have you ever walked up to somebody with Lily? The worst part about Clancy is very obvious. It's when you get stuck at level 1 and the enemies just will not let you level up. There are situations when this happens. If you get out drafted or you're playing ladder and they just pick the brawlers who really counter you, there's almost no way to level up and it really sucks. I think now the worst part about Mo has to be his projectile speed. Could also be his damage, but I'm not too sure about that. But they did nerf his projectile speed and it just made it a lot worse. Now hear me out, Juju is extremely broken, so she almost has no problems. She has ways to get out of pretty much any situation, but I think the worst part about her is the way that your attack just kind of like zooms up like that when you enter a bush. I know this is a really niche thing, but I do think that's the worst part about her. It just feels a little weird. I think the worst thing about Ollie now is his damage, even though it got buffed. You could also say it's his reload speed, but they got rid of the silence that he had. And yeah, the only things I really see myself struggling with Ollie now is, I mean, more often than anything else, it is the reload speed. Like, you could definitely use more ammo with Ollie. So yeah, I just lost my ammo when I supered. That's weird. Yeah, I just realized that was his new mechanic instead of the silence. Overall, yeah, I think it's his ammo. That's the problem. I think the worst thing about Finks is when enemies walk into your super, because at that point, your super doesn't really affect them at all. Like, if they're even this far in and then they shoot this way, their shots don't really get slowed. It's almost as if your super doesn't exist. Man, Spike is a weird one. Like, what's the worst thing about him? I think it has to be how squishy he is, because otherwise, like, his reload speed isn't really that bad. It is kind of slow, but I don't think it's the worst thing in the world. His super is good. His gadgets are good. His star powers are both really good now. Yeah, I think the worst thing is his health. It's pretty low. The worst thing about Crow, you could say it's his health, but I think that it is his super charge rate. It takes forever to get his super. He used to get it really fast. It was the most fun thing in the world, but now it takes like so long to get it. Even if you're hitting multiple people, poisoning them, it just takes so long. Okay, hear me out. I know this gadget is not the worst gadget in the game, but I think the worst thing about Leon is his clone gadget, because most other things about this brawler is really good. His star powers are insane. His other gadget is really, really good. His hypercharge is insane. His attacks are good. His reload speed is not bad. His health is fine. I do think the worst thing is the clone gadget, because the other one's just better. Similar situation for Sandy. He's a really well-rounded brawler. You could say the worst thing about him is his range, but even that, it's not that bad. Like, obviously it holds him back, but I think the other worst thing about him is his sleep gadget, the one that puts you to sleep, because there's a reason why pros hate it. You put yourself to sleep, you stop moving, you can be really vulnerable. Plus his other gadget is so much better, so I think that's the worst part about him. The worst part about Amber, without a doubt, is being out of ammo, because it's not the same as other brawlers where you can deal some burst damage in between shots like this. No, you get one piece of fire every so often, and that does dirt damage. It is terrible. This is by far the worst part about her. Now this one's pretty obvious, but the worst part about Meg is baby Meg form. It locks you out of so many things. You cannot use your heal gadget, mecha required. If you had your super in the mecha, you don't get it back here. You're basically reset to bare bones. Her attack sucks, her health sucks, everything about her sucks, her movement sucks. Like, everything is terrible in baby Meg form. Pretty much everything about Surge is broken, but the one problem he has and the worst thing about him is being stuck at level 1. If the enemies know what they're doing and they have more range than you, or they just zone you out too well, you can possibly be useless for an entire game if they play right. That is by far the worst thing about him, because he's really slow. He's just not good at level 1. Some people might not agree with this, but I think the worst thing about Chester is still his sneak peek star power, just because the other one is so much better, and a good Chester player will think ahead of what they need to do anyways with any of the supers. And a lot of the time you can just react to a super and then cycle it out if you see that it's a bad one, and then just see what you get next. Overall, sneak peek is just not that good. Cordelius is tough because he is a very good brawler, so I do think the only thing that holds him back is range. That has to be the worst thing about him, because like every other aspect about this brawler is so good besides range. The worst part about Kit is easily jumping on an enemy brawler. Not only do you not have protection, so you're essentially making yourself just as vulnerable as they are, but if you do jump on an enemy and say you're in a mode like showdown where multiple people can be attacked at once, like there's no teams, you are the main target. If you jump on an enemy and a Piper shoots your direction, the bullet will hit you first instead of the enemy that you're on. You're basically shielding them. That is definitely the worst part about Kit. Draco has a lot of OP mechanics, but I do think the worst part about him is his main attack. It just feels a little clunky. I don't know if I'm alone on this, but it feels like one of the more clunky attacks in the game. It feels a little bit delayed. Like the projectile speed is not that good. The range is bad. I just think overall his attack without the dragon is not that good, but once you get the dragon, you're broken. Kenji is a difficult one because in the right hands, he's really good, but thinking about the things that hold him back, there's only a few, and I just think it is his range. Like obviously it is how it is for a reason, but really thinking about it, like what is worse about him than his range? Could also say it's dashy dash. But yeah, that is the worst thing about every brawler. There are so many brawlers in this game at this point. Again, make sure you go check out Jimbo's video. It will be in the description. Watch it right now, and I'll see you later. Have a good night.